Looks like Scott Woodward's days are numbered, and maybe Joe Dumars and Willie Green will be joining him on the unemployment line. We'll be talking about that and so much more today on the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. And welcome everyone to another edition of the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. Appreciate you listening in as always, and more importantly, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and also over on YouTube. And I'm going to go ahead and preface this episode by saying I'm not going to crash out off of the stuff that came out earlier today with, Jeff Landry, what he said, because I've had some time to think about it. It's still ridiculous to me, though, that the governor is basically saying Scott Woodward will not hire and make the decision to hire the next head coach. Since he is the athletic director. Because you look at the history of Louisiana, there's a big chapter in that involves one Huey P. Long. Like, the man pretty much had LSU as his giant pet project. The only difference between Jeff Landry and Huey P. Long is the fact that Huey P. Long at least had some charisma behind him. He was kind of a cult of personality. Jeff Landry is just Jeff Landry. We'll leave that there. But when you look at what happened with the press conference that was done yesterday afternoon, you have to kind of think out loud, like, what the heck is going on here? Where he pretty much lambasted Scott Woodward while also getting the facts completely wrong, saying that it was a combined like $70 million of buyout money between Brian Kelly and Jimbo Fisher. Now, yes, Jimbo Fisher was hired by Scott Woodward back when he was running Texas A&M. He had nothing to do with the contract extension that resulted in the massive buyout that one Jimbo Fisher got. That was not his fault by any means, because he was already at LSU when that happened. Like, that alone was just like mind-boggling to me, that he couldn't get his facts straight relative to what's going on with LSU and the status they have right now. Obviously, he's got a lot going on. His plate is full, especially when it comes to LSU. They're trying to determine who is going to be the president. They're down to their final 4 candidates for that vacancy. And then they can kind of start focusing on what's going on with the LSU football team and start truly doing a deep dive into coaching search. But when you have that kind of dysfunction, where the governor is throwing shade at your AD and saying, hey, and he didn't outright say it, but if you read between the tea leaves, I think it's safe to say that Scott Woodward is updating his resume on LinkedIn because he knows he's going to be promoted to customer before too long. And it's one of those, like, damn, really? Because you look at what Scott Woodward has done. His resume at LSU speaks for itself. He comes aboard, helps out. They get a national championship in baseball, 2 of them, in fact, with the coach that he hired in Jay Johnson. And then obviously another coach that he hired, Kim Mulkey, bringing her back into the fold here in the great state of Louisiana. She wound up winning a natty in her second year. Yes, the Brian Kelly experiment may have been a failure from the jump, but it's a lot like what I've said recently on this podcast, is when you see a change in power, especially in sports, when you go from one coach to another, you see the pendulum shift from one extreme to the other. You look at Ed Ogeron. He was the Cajun ball, goofball, entertaining, and endearing. Meanwhile, Brian Kelly, much more buttoned up, the CEO energy. He was kind of the office guy. Very much, my way or the highway type of guy. It was the opposite of Coach O's rah rah. It was buttoned up. Everything's going to be done a certain way. And safe to say, it rubbed some people the wrong way, especially Jeff Landry, because you started losing ball games against very good teams. It's almost the exact opposite of what we saw with Les Miles, where Les Miles was losing games to very mediocre teams. We're looking at you, mid-2010s Arkansas. We're looking at you, middle of the road, mid-tier Auburn, where LSU lost, even though the other team could really only score field goals that entire game. Never going to forget that Daniel Carson game. I think it was like 6 for 6 on the evening. And that was the game that did in Les Miles. And then you wind up seeing Ed Orgeron take over. But I digress. You look at the way things are in the world of college football. 4 years. If you had told me Brian Kelly would have been gone within 4 years prior to the NIL era, I would have been like, what are you talking about? Like, there's no way that would ever happen. Because coaches, to a certain extent, got a lot of rope to proverbially hang themselves in the pre-NIL era. Because one of the big talking points many people have said is it takes roundabout 3 years for you to truly build your roster with your ingredients. If you're handed a bag of doo-doo, you are going to be having a rough time from the get-go. But if you are given a time to build and cultivate your roster, your staff, and kind of rebuild from the ground up, I guarantee you things will start turning around very quickly. And more importantly, you can get it done. Ed Orgeron is a prime example of that. Probably one of the last ones to truly say, hey, you gave me 3 years. Look at what I was able to do. Mind you, he got lucky because he was able to recruit one of the greatest quarterbacks in college football history in one Joe Burrow. Lightning will not strike twice. And it just, like, this just screams, oh, hey, we're having this guy say the quiet part out loud. That is the most insane thing that my brain has been processing the last, 12 hours since the announcement or the press conference where Jeff Landry said all this. I was just like, what is going on here? Because now you are pretty much saying, without actually saying it, that Scott Woodward is going to be out the door after we get this new LSU presidential hire underway. Now, obviously, he's got some other decisions to make, namely who's going to be the new president for the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. But LSU obviously is going to take some priority. Again, it goes back to the history of Louisiana, especially in the last 100 years. Huey P. Long pretty much treated LSU as a pet project. And it feels like Jeff Landry, even though he's a UL Lafayette graduate, he's treating it very much the same way. And it's maddening to me because I feel like there are a lot more important things he could be dealing with right now in 2025. But again, just feels like it's par for the course when it comes to what LSU has been able to do over the last few years. It's been underwhelming. And the billion-dollar question is, how much is what was said today going to affect this team in the long term? How much is Jeff Landry putting his fingers in this proverbial pie going to affect the coaching search? I said it on the pod on Tuesday talking about the Lane Kiffin situation. And some people on YouTube, by the way, you can search us at Louisiana Lunch Hour. They were kind of lambasting me saying, I was going with more of a Florida slant. That was not my intention. It's just facts. Whenever you have Nike, it's a lot like the Dan Lanning situation. Dan Lanning is pretty much a guy who has the infinite money glitch because Nike is a massive donor. And I think Florida, with the Jumpman brand, that NIL packages that they probably have in place, that is going to be very, enticing for a head coach to make that jump. I still don't think Lane Kiffin even makes the jump at all. Simply because I'm just not sold on it long term. But with that news, with this statement that was said by Jeff Landry over in our state capital here in Louisiana, Baton Rouge, you kind of have to start questioning your own sanity. And also, you got to start wondering, how much did that impact the future of this coaching search? Are some of the big names wanting to go there? Are we going to see this result in, oh, hey, we don't have a whole lot of incredible options out there? And especially with the entire new AD situation that's not official in any way, shape, or form. We're just speculating at this point. But if you're able to read between the tea leaves, that's kind of the end game here. And I'm hoping this is not the situation that happens. But the more I hear this man speak, the more I start to just say, they're really going to do it, aren't they? They're really going to go ahead and bring back Ed Ogeron one way or another. And I feel like that is a massive red flag, number one. Simply because I feel like people have forgotten why he was let go. After the pandemic, after that March in 2020, not March of 2020, there was a march, a Black Lives Matter rally in 2020, and the team more or less gave up on him after that. Players were opting out because of COVID to focus on the NFL draft, and the guys that were left didn't perform to the level that we expected. Now, it's almost a case of deja vu. Could Ed Ogeron be the guy to take over as the athletic director and maybe even be the head coach, pull a wild rabbit out the hat on that? Maybe. I think people forget for a minute, Phil Fulmer was an AD, and that man felt like he was never going to leave that position. Who's to say Ed Ogeron, with his love for LSU, he could easily have that job ready and available for him, and he could pretty much get his good old boys network working, which I think is going to be a massive problem down the road. I don't think it's going to be a problem tomorrow or 2-3 years down the road. But I think 5 years down the road, if we eventually start seeing that good old boys network really seep in, there's going to be a big problem. And the biggest problem I have is what happens when when LSU makes this decision to hire who they're going to hire, and more importantly, what's going to happen with Frank Wilson. A lot of people have been making this debate. I saw this on X yesterday afternoon, and I genuinely just shook my head about the idea of, one, bringing back Ed Ogeron as the true CEO, the athletic director, because I don't think he'd be a good fit. It'd be good for some laughs and be entertaining, but that's not what you want if you're a SEC school that has heavy aspirations. Could he help with, recruiting guys and handling some staff stuff? Absolutely. But I don't want him to be anywhere near the LSU program. The damage has been done with him. And even with Frank. People who are bringing up Frank Wilson and saying, oh, hey, he's a good head coach. I'm like, no, not really. Like, as a running backs coach, as a recruiter, probably one of the best. And he was a big reason why the Cajuns were what they were back in the gap. Whenever Frank Wilson was part of that staff. Recruiting trail, great. But it's the X's and O's. He can't necessarily be able to add that all together. Very underwhelming performances as a head coach at, McNeese and UTSA. Obviously, COVID and the hurricanes affected McNeese in a way that nobody ever expected. But you still look at that 2020-2021 season, and then right after that gets Das Boot and comes back to LSU as a member of that offensive staff. It's a great story, but at the same time, I just don't think lightning strikes twice. I don't believe we see Frank Wilson be the head coach, no matter what, in my mind. Like, I saw people on social pretty much saying, hey, we want to see this guy in this, this coffee shack. That's kind of where my head is at when it comes to LSU football. Now, I think Dan Lanning, that's going to be off the table. Lane Kiffin still off the table, at least in my mind. Especially whenever you have Jeff Landry saying, I'm not going to be cutting a check for a buyout for $53 million. I feel like a lot of these top flight head coaches that could probably win you a national championship in 2026 are going to look at that and kind of just step away, because if your price is that low, you're not going to get what we want out of this. That's just how I see it. But it'll be intriguing to see what happens going forward over the next few weeks, especially with Scott Woodward, and we'll make sure to update you as soon as we get the latest. Meanwhile, it continues to amaze me that the New Orleans Pelicans just are stinking up the joint. I understand that they are not going to be a contender. I knew that pretty much from Jump Street, but Zion Williamson played 26 minutes. Great. Only 11 points. The rookie Jeremiah Fears has been carrying this team, 21 points in 30 minutes of action. You lose 122-88 to a Denver Nuggets team who is very, very good. But that's two straight losses you have that are by 30, damn near 40 points tonight. That is not good basketball. And you got to kind of think, if you're Gail Benson and Mickey Loomis, one, you're probably having a money fight right now. So because, you're making all this money, but the results aren't showing. You're 0-4. I think the Joe Dumars experiment is going to end very quickly, and it will end in a blaze of glory. And I feel like Willie Green may be the first casualty in that, which is wild to think about. That there may be a chance the Pelicans and LSU may be looking for a head coach around that same time, and I think everybody's playing tracker is going to go crazy. I'm just not enthralled by this Pelicans team. Not a whole lot of good stats. A lot of players were in minus range in terms of their plus minuses. Trey Murphy, minus 32, 7 points. Not a good look at all for him. He had 7 boards total, 9 assists, no assists, and 1 steal. That's not what you want to see if you're the Pelicans. Like, most of your starting 5 were in the negative. Actually, in fact, all your starting 5. But the Trey Murphy one sticks out like a sore thumb alongside Unk status, DeAndre Jordan. Only 2 points in 12 minutes of action, minus 21. 5 rebounds, but nothing else on that front besides a turnover. Just was not a great performance for this Pelicans team early on. And yes, it's a very good team. The Nuggets are a couple years removed from a championship. You've still got some of the best players in the league a part of this team, especially Nikola Jokic, who was 10 of 15 from the field, 21 points in the dub. But you have so much talent from top to bottom. This Pelicans team is getting cooked, and I think this is more me doubling down on what the hell's going on over in New Orleans, where you're 0-4 and you probably don't have a chance of getting a top 5 pick because you traded one to the Atlanta Braves. I don't understand that trade that was made. Simply because now you pretty much, in my heart, kind of screwed the pooch. And it's more because I just don't like what I've seen. The performances have been very mediocre. And then you have to kind of step your game up as we progress in the season. And I don't think that's going to happen. And Gail Benson and crew got to be kind of thinking like, we need to make some wholesale changes. But you're not going to be able to make any significant changes simply because of the fact that based off of the tankathon, if you get like a top 5 pick, that's going straight to the Atlanta Hawks. Not great, Bob. Not great. And it feels like you're going to be in that, Bob number. At least that's just the way I think about it. I'm sure many are going to be saying by the end of the season, not great, Bob, because it is not a great look for this Pelicans team. Meanwhile, tonight, we've got the Tulane Green Wave back in action in a good old American matchup. And they've been a good team so far this year. The Tulane Green Wave taking on the Roadrunners of UTSA, who are standing at 3-4. I just feel like this is going to be a nice win for the good old boys that are the Green Wave. John Summerall said it best earlier in this week. Obviously, he's one of the guys that are going to be heavily recruited in terms of contract negotiations this offseason because, again, he is that fresh new hotness. I said it on the pod earlier this week. I feel more of the same now. They're not going to be going after somebody from within the state of Louisiana. They're going out of their way to avoid that because that's going to cause even more conflict and strife between Baton Rouge and the University of Tulane. Because I think it's safe to say Tulane's already kind of Hatfields and McCoys with them. And it feels like it's going to go full that way where they will never play each other again because of the way that they've handled business. You have your head coach that looks like he could, still be in college, but he's still performing at a pretty consistent clip, and he looks pretty decent when he's doing it. I'm just hoping that they can get it done. And John Summerall can continue to kind of look at what's out there. Because obviously he won't be making any decisions till after the bowl game is complete. And barring anything, I feel like the Green Wave aren't going to be in a high caliber bowl game at this point in time. They could be in one of those New Year's games. I still feel like, no matter what, it's going to be interesting to see where things kind of go when it comes to the rest of the season for the Green Wave. Can they hold on for dear life to what they've been trying to do? We shall indeed see. But I'm about to get out of here. Hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. Appreciate you listening in. As always, if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe today. Louisiana Lunch Hour on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Enjoy the rest of your day.